Several types of jets were named at the time, including the F-16s that Ukraine was already receiving, along with the Swedish-made Gripen and the French-made Rafale. The Mirage 2000 wasn't on the list, but Ukraine will still bite France's hand off to get these jets. After all, Ukraine already knows how effective this particular jet is. We've covered the offensive aspects, but on the defense front, Mirage 2000s will be huge for Ukraine as it battles against Russia's constant streams of drones and missiles. We'll be digging into that topic in a moment when we cover another weapon that will be making its way to Ukraine due to France. But the important thing here is that Ukraine already has a handful of Mirage 2000s, and it has been using them to destroy Russian cruise missiles. Ukraine has been operating 6 Mirage 2005Fs since February of 2025, and they displayed why they're so vital during a March airstrike by Russia. The attack, which saw Russia launch 67 missiles and 194 drones at Ukraine, prompted Ukraine to test out its new Mirage jets for the first time. They contributed to destroying 34 of the Russian missiles and 100 drones, leading Zelensky to state, "Today, F-16 fighter jets and Mirage aircraft provided by France were used to protect Ukrainian skies. In particular, the Mirages successfully intercepted Russian cruise missiles." Ukraine is already using its Mirages and F-16s in tandem. As for how many it's set to receive from France, the answer is a little up in the air. Back in January, David Axe, writing for Euromaidan Press, suggested that France may give all 26 of its leftover Mirage stock to Ukraine. He also noted that the supersonic jets, which were introduced in the 1980s, had only flown defensive sorties up until that point. We saw something similar with the first F-16s that arrived in Ukraine. They only started to be used for attacks, once Ukraine received enough to be able to justify the occasional loss. If 26 Mirage 2000s head into Ukraine from France, it likely won't be long before we see them bombing Russian positions, perhaps using AASM Hammers. Granted, the Mirage 2000 is less advanced than the Rafale fighter jets that Zelensky placed on his wish list in October. However, as Ukrinform pointed out back in February 2025, the jets have been modified so that they can fire long-range SCALP and Storm Shadow missiles. So even if they're not used to launch Hammers, the Mirage 2000s can still become essential. Long-range assets used to launch missiles that we know Ukraine has been using since almost the beginning of the war. Now, we touched on Ukraine's air defense challenges a moment ago. We're about to dive deeper into that topic as we reveal what else Macron is going to be sending to Ukraine. But before we do, if this is the kind of insight you're looking for, make sure you subscribe to the Military Show. We break it down like this every single week. Returning to air defenses, it's no secret that Ukraine has a Russian missile and drone problem. Toward the back end of 2025, Russia ramped up its aerial strategy by sending record-breaking numbers of projectiles into Ukraine. The Ukrainian Review says that Russia launched about 100,000 drones, 2,400 missiles, and over 60,000 glide bombs at Ukraine last year, with the shelling intensifying significantly from June onward. Russia went from attacking an approximate average of 200 to 300 targets per strike to more than double the high end of that range by August. Russia hasn't let up in 2026, leading to both Zelensky and media outlets, such as the Kyiv Post, to point out that Russia is exploiting a weakness in Ukraine's defenses. The situation has been getting better for Ukraine. As Zelensky said in January, Ukraine now has more air defenses, thanks to its Western partners, but Russia still has plenty of missiles for future attacks. Ukraine needs more missiles, more air defenses, Zelensky flatly stated, noting that the U.S. and its Patriot systems were really the only weapons that Ukraine has against the ballistic missiles in Russia's arsenal. That's not to say that other air defense systems aren't needed, as drones and cruise missiles can be destroyed by far more than the Patriot. But what we see here is Zelensky once again noting that Ukraine has a vulnerability that Russia is exploiting with its aerial bombardments. Writing for the Kyiv Post, Stefan Korshak said the same on February 2nd. In particular, Korshak noted that Russia had started experiencing far more success with its cruise missiles by the beginning of 2026, indicating air defense system and ammunition shortages on Ukraine's part. However, the numbers for cruise missiles had shifted dramatically and sharply in Russia's favor. In August-September, only a little more than 1 in 20 Russian cruise missiles was able to break through Ukrainian air defenses. In January 2026, The shoot-down intercept rate had fallen to about 33 to 35% of all cruise missile engagements, according to the data, Korshak wrote. That's where Macron and his insane U.S. stunning plan come into play. Ukraine isn't just receiving Mirage 2000s that it can use to shoot down Russian cruise missiles. According to United 24 Media, SAMP-T, Mistral, and Krotal air defense systems, all with the necessary ammunition, are also on the way into Ukraine. All three of these defense systems are important, but it's the SAMP-T that is vital to Ukraine. Officials from the country have already proposed working alongside France to upgrade the SAMP-T systems that Ukraine will be receiving so that they're capable of dealing with Russia's ballistic missile threat. The speeding up of Aster. Interceptor missile production has also been discussed, which could conceivably be achieved via the joint production strategy announced by France and Ukraine. If these discussions turn into tangible action, that will reinforce an air defense system that is already set to receive replacement radar from France, as reported by United 24 Media on February 9th. During a briefing in Kyiv, Vautrin announced this new radar, in addition to noting that France was already working alongside Ukraine to repair other radars that have been damaged by Russia's constant airstrikes and other attacks. We are working on this issue, including the repair of the radar for the SAMP-T. And we plan to provide a replacement radar while the original is undergoing repairs, Vautrin explained. So Ukraine's existing SAMP-T may be getting a boost. But it's the suggestion that more are on their way that will be huge for Ukraine. France has promised that Ukraine will receive 8 SAMP-T air defense systems and that it will get new systems before either France or Italy, both of which are waiting to receive more. Each of these systems includes 6 launchers, which will mean that the 8 new SAMP-Ts will boost Ukraine's total number of launchers up to 48 per Militarny. As for why more SAMP-T air defense systems matter so much, Army Recognition explains that the SAMP-T was specifically designed to deal with the threats that Ukraine faces from Russia. Do you remember the cruise missiles that we mentioned earlier? SAMP-T takes those missiles down, so 8 new systems arriving is huge news for Ukraine. SAMP-T systems can also be used to shoot down unmanned aerial vehicles, though whether Ukraine will use what's coming for that purpose is unknown, given that it has other options for dealing with weapons that typically pack less firepower than Russia's cruise missiles. The SAMP-T standard missiles have a range of about 100 kilometers, or about 62 miles, making the system ideal for dealing with medium-range threats. Plus, each missile's explosive load of 15 kilograms, or about 33 pounds, is more than enough to destroy drones and cruise missiles, regardless of whether the Aster missiles that the SAMP-T fires have high explosive or fragmentation warheads. Add the missile size itself, which is about 450 kilograms or 992 pounds, and you get a kinetic threat that is as dangerous, if not more so, than the missile's payload. And again, remember the joint production deal. It's possible that the deal could lead to Ukraine building more Aster missiles on its own turf, which counters the availability challenges that have led to its air defenses becoming more fragile. Against Russian missiles in 2026, all of this brings us back to the familiar long-range weapon that we mentioned near the beginning of the video. Attentive viewers may have already guessed what that weapon is, as we mentioned it when talking about the Mirage 2000's capabilities. Have you guessed what it is? If you said SCALP, then give yourself a pat on the back. There is a disclaimer here. While the other systems we've talked about, in addition to the joint production program, are all practically confirmed, the supply of SCALP missiles is still on the table. Fedorov said as much in his Telegram post, stating, separately, discussed the provision of long-range weapons, in particular SCALP missiles, when outlining the meeting between himself and Vautrin. But the takeaway here is that SCALP was mentioned, and that is a missile that France produces. We can only speculate what the discussion of these missiles covered. Perhaps SCALP is another weapon that Ukraine believes it would be able to build, as part of the joint program between itself and France. If not, perhaps France is willing to provide more, either as military aid or through a purchase. What we know for sure is that SCALP has been an important weapon for Ukraine. It, along with the UK version of the weapon, named Storm Shadow, has been used for everything from attacks on the Black Sea Fleet to strikes against key Russian military sites, including chemical plants and command posts. It's a versatile missile. If Ukraine gets more SCALPs, they will be the cherry on top of a delicious weapon. France's president, Emmanuel Macron, did it once, and he's doing it again. A bumper defense package is on its way to Ukraine that is so massive that even the US is stunned by what is coming. France has gone all in. Macron is tired of Putin and his devastating way. And he's just done something so legitimately insane that you won't believe it. Wait, did we say something? We meant some things. Let's start with the headline before we dig into what it is going to mean for Ukraine in the coming months and years. According to Defense Express, a meeting between Ukraine's defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, and his French counterpart, Catherine Vautrin, who was acting on Macron's behalf, has resulted in the signing of a vital letter of intent. This letter outlines plans for joint weapons production on both French and Ukrainian soil. This is huge for Ukraine. Up until this point, France has played provider of the weapons that Ukraine has received from the country. That is a partnership, though it is also one that is lopsided in France's direction. With this letter of intent comes the recognition of Ukraine as an equal, as a valued defense partner that can provide just as much as it takes. What we're seeing here is a fundamental shift in the way that France and Ukraine collaborate. The two countries are moving toward a form of shared production that will have massive ramifications for the future. In the immediate sense, Ukraine bolsters its defense capabilities as it defends its territory against Russian aggression. Domestic plants producing French-made weapons inside Ukraine slashes away at logistical challenges by ensuring that Ukraine has the weapons it needs as quickly as it can build them. Having joint plants in French territory is also a boon, as those plants aren't going to be attacked by Putin unless he makes the insane choice to start a war with France and, by extension, all of NATO. So, if something happens to the joint plants in Ukraine, the plants in France serve as a backup that keeps the weapons flowing. The Kyiv Post lays it all out. The agreement opens the way for large-scale joint projects involving government institutions and defense companies from Ukraine and France, including the testing of security solutions and the development of electronic warfare systems, the outlet stated in its report. And that brings us to what this joint agreement means over the long term. Ukraine will be the immediate beneficiary, but over the coming years, both Ukraine and France will become stronger through this collaboration. The entire defensive infrastructure of Europe is being transformed through partnerships just like this one, which are designed to show Putin one thing. If Russia's president thought he could take Ukraine today and then switch his focus to the rest of Europe tomorrow, he is dead wrong. Both are getting stronger. And Russia is getting weaker every day that it's losing soldiers and equipment in Ukraine. That alone is insane. But now, we're going to dig into the other announcements that came out of the meeting between Fedorov and Vautrin. AASM Hammer bombs, Mirage fighter jets, new air defenses, and maybe even a long-range weapon with which Ukraine is very familiar and has proven to be a killer of Russian equipment are all coming. Stick with us, as we're going to run down everything during the video to show you why an already insane move by Macron gets even bigger and better. Beginning with the AASM Hammer, we have learned that record-breaking quantities of this powerful weapon are coming to Ukraine. United 24 Media says as much in its February 9th report of the meeting of defense ministers, and the arrival of yet more of these precision-guided aerial bombs is huge for Ukraine. They also discussed accelerating the supply of aircraft and continuing work on record volumes of AASM Hammer precision-guided aerial bombs. Fedorov said in a Telegram post following the meeting, and there are plenty of reasons why Ukraine wants more AASM Hammers. The AASM Hammer has become Ukraine's favorite smart bomb, United 24 Media declared back in July 2025. The outlet made that claim following the unveiling of a new version of the bomb at the Paris Air Show, which revealed that France had developed new kits designed for use with 250 and 1,000 kilogram bombs, which are equivalent to between 500 and 2,000 pounds. There was also talk at the time that the manufacturer of the AASM Hammer, Safran, was also working on expanding the weapon's high-altitude range from 70 kilometers, or 43.4 miles, up to as far as 200 kilometers, or around 124 miles. In short, these upgrades would allow Ukraine to hit Russia harder and deeper, making them the ideal choice for use against key military nodes, such as command and control centers and drone operator headquarters, that Russia has built in the occupied territories of Ukraine. These mentions of kits and bombs also clue you into what the AASM Hammer is. It's not a bomb in its own right. Rather, the Hammer kits are used to add guidance and additional propulsion to existing bombs, transforming them from the kinds of dumb bombs that need to be dropped directly over a target into guided munitions that can be fired from a distance. and still trusted to hit that target. For Ukraine, this means the AASM Hammer gives it the capability to launch munitions from safe territory into the Russian rear, causing enormous amounts of damage every time a hammer strikes. As for the record-breaking numbers, we don't know exactly what they are, yet. We do know that United 24 Media announced in May 2025 that France had intended to supply 1/200 of its jamming-resistant AASM Hammer bomb kits to Ukraine by the end of 2025, which was a marked increase over the 830 units that it delivered during the previous year. If records are going to be broken in 2026, that seems to mean that more than 1/200 of these new kits are on their way. And if France and Ukraine develop an AASM Hammer manufacturing plant inside Ukraine by the end of the year, then the real number could end up being enormous. Ukraine will build what it needs, and it will strap these hammer kits to the many dumb bombs that it has in its arsenal. And when Ukraine has the hammers ready, it may soon have a lot more of what it needs to send them streaking into the skies. A record-breaking number of AASM Hammer kits isn't the only thing that Macron seems ready to pledge to Ukraine via the latest bumper round of support. According to United 24 Media, a new transfer of Mirage 2000 fighter jets is being prepared for Ukraine, which will go a long way toward boosting the country's air power on both the offensive and defensive fronts. Offensively, more Mirage 2000 simply means more airframes from which Ukraine can launch weapons like the AASM Hammer into the occupied territories. This is also a transfer that directly feeds into something that Ukraine says it needs a lot more of. Back in October, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said that his country needed at least 250 fighter jets to re-equip and modernize its air force.